I've always loved the desert. There's a stark beauty to its vast emptiness. No distractions, no obligations, just you and the land. It's the kind of solitude that clears your mind, makes you feel like you're part of something ancient. But what happened last October ruined that for me. I don't tell this story often because most people don't believe it, and frankly, I wish I didn't either. But it's burned into my memory. I'll never forget what I saw and heard. It started as a simple camping trip, one of many I'd taken to a spot near Dead Man's Ridge on the Navajo reservation. The place is remote, miles away from any towns or paved roads. That's why I loved it. No light pollution, no noise, just the stars and the whisper of the wind across the rocks. Locals had warned me about the area, spinning tales about cursed land and strange figures that wander the desert. I'd always dismissed it as folklore, the kind of stories people tell to keep kids from wandering too far. If only I'd listened. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, setting up my tent in a shallow valley at the base of the ridge. The air was dry, the sun blazing overhead. It was perfect. After pitching my tent and gathering some firewood, I sat back to enjoy the view as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery reds and purples. I cooked dinner over a small fire, watched the stars come out, and eventually crawled into my sleeping bag. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. Something had stirred me, but I wasn't sure what. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as I lay there, I noticed the stillness. The usual sounds of the desert, the chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl were gone. The silence was suffocating, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A low growl, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere outside the tent. My pulse quickened. I'd camped here plenty of times before and had never encountered anything larger than a jackrabbit. This wasn't a rabbit. The growl was deep, guttural, and too deliberate to be the wind. Grabbing my flashlight, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint orange glow over the campsite. I scanned the area with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing, just rocks and scrub. But the growl continued, steady and rhythmic, as if it were circling me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching the knife I always kept in my pack. The growling eventually stopped, but the silence remained, thick and oppressive. When dawn finally broke, I emerged from the tent, exhausted but relieved to see the sun. I convinced myself it had been some kind of animal, a coyote maybe, and tried to shake off the unease. The next day, I spent hours hiking the ridge, hoping the exercise would clear my head. The landscape was breathtaking as always, the kind of rugged beauty that makes you forget the rest of the world exists. But as the sun began to set, that feeling of unease crept back in. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. I returned to camp earlier than usual, skipping the fire altogether. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, not after the night before. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening to the wind howl over the ridge. Hours passed. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it again. The growl. This time it was louder, closer. My blood turned to ice. It didn't circle the campsite like before. It stayed in one spot, just beyond the edge of the tent. And then it spoke. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The growl warped and stretched, forming something that almost sounded like words. My name. It said my name. I froze. My throat tightened, my hands shaking as I gripped the knife. How could it know my name? The voice was deep, guttural, but there was something disturbingly familiar about it, like an echo of my own voice. It repeated my name again and again, each time more human, more mocking. And then it laughed. A sound so unnatural, so wrong, it made my stomach churn. The laughter grew louder, almost manic, as if it was enjoying my fear. I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the tent and bolted into the night. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. The moonlight illuminated the rocky terrain, but every shadow felt alive, as if something was lurking just out of sight. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the brush, its laughter echoing in the still air. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I reached a small cave on the side of the ridge. I ducked inside, pressing myself against the cold stone. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath, but I didn't dare make a sound. The growling stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if it were savoring the hunt. My pulse thundered in my ears as the footsteps grew louder, closer. The shadow of something tall and misshapen appeared at the mouth of the cave. It stepped into the moonlight, and I finally saw it. It was tall, impossibly tall, with a gaunt skeletal frame. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending in unnatural ways. Patches of matted fur clung to its emaciated body, and its face was a grotesque mockery of a human, with sunken eyes that glowed faintly in the dark and a mouth full of jagged teeth. It smiled at me, a twisted grin that sent a shiver down my spine. "Why are you running?" it asked, its voice a warped echo of my own. "Don't you want to stay?" I clutched the knife, but I knew it was useless. This thing wasn't human. It wasn't even an animal. It was something else, something ancient and malevolent. The thing crouched down, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. It whispered my name one last time before letting out a deafening screech that seemed to shake the ground beneath me. I don't remember what happened after that. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was lying outside the cave. My hands were covered in cuts and bruises, and my knife was gone. I didn't wait to find out what had happened. I grabbed my gear and left, not stopping until I was miles away from Dead Man's Ridge. I've told this story a handful of times, but no one ever believes me. They say I was hallucinating, that I was dehydrated or sleep-deprived, but I know what I saw, what I heard, and sometimes late at night I still hear it, the growling, the laughter, my own voice whispering my name. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, and I don't think it's done with me yet.